you mentioned like, oh, getting into art is a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's like what I was, you know, taught to believe my entire life.
Yeah.
So I was avoiding doing artwork my whole life, and I only fell into it accidentally. But I personally think that because I thought of artwork that way, that made artwork safe for me up all the way up until that time as a purely like hobby thing that I could just focus on enjoying, which I think anytime you want to get good at anything, you're gonna need a lot of like room to fail, and then when you don't feel bad about that failure all along the way, that's when you can actually get good at it.
They start these things. The purpose of this is not to talk about how to become an artist or how to get a job or how to make money or any of that kind of stuff. It's more about the why of it. You know, it's like
The why?
Yeah, it's like I think in general, you know, art is a bad idea logically. Like people should just be mechanical engineers or lawyers or something, and to push through the like the hard part of art, I think it takes some emotion, and it takes some like love for it. That it's like I think it's almost like it's sort of hard to articulate, you know. And I guess when I look at you, it's like you've been able to make a living out of essentially like drawing anime and anime boys and stuff, which I think is like amazing. It's incredible, you know. And it's like, I'm sure for you it's been a really weird and unpredictable journey getting to where you're at now, but you know, and I guess it's all about that kind of stuff mostly.
Okay.
Do you have any initial thoughts or anything, or?
More so that no, I want to watch the rest of your podcast and see what how similar or common my journey is compared to other people's journeys.
Yeah.
But you know, just
Well,
I definitely feels like a very unique road to get to it.
Well, I think in general, everyone's path is unique in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Like, you know, you said you didn't go to art school, which is like, you know, I think a lot of people go to art school, but the things that happen afterwards, it's like, oh, maybe they can't get work in the way that they wanted to. Or,
right.
You know, they get work, but it's not exactly what they expected it to be or something. You know?
Yeah.
And for your degree, what were you studying initially?
I was studying basically film for both undergrad and grad school.
Yeah.
So I was in film production, like, as my first initial careers, and then I switched from that to video games.
Yeah.
And video games was like where I had enough of like a period of time just crafting things. I think probably got enough practice drawing that I was able to transition into doing artwork. So that's
Well, and I think in general, it's like, it's not obvious. And I meet people all the time who are like, you know, oh, should I go to art school? Should I get a technical degree? Should I do this or that? And I think ultimately, like, the thing, like across the board, everyone says the degree really doesn't matter. You know, it's all about like trying to pursue like what you actually care about and what your passions actually are. You know?
Right.
And for you, it's like, you know, it's like I think you were just drawing for fun essentially, right? When you were doing all this stuff.
Right. Well, in like the first year of convention, I don't know. Should we record or?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna keep checking these cameras because sometimes, we're.
Oh, we're already recording.
Yeah,
I was like holding back answers because I was like,
no,
I shouldn't repeat myself later. When we record. Okay.
I'm sorry.
So we're going.
Yeah,
okay.
Cool.
Cool.
Should let you know.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. I get nervous and I like skip steps and stuff.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. I just like I know because like I said, I used to be in film, so I used to help out in documentary films and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I have a little bit of experience, I should say, with like conducting the interview and like not trying to ask the same question twice. And be fresh for answers. So that's why. Sorry.
No, I totally understand.
I was like, I'll tell you later.
When it's important.
When you're not recording anymore, I'll tell you afterwards.
Well, the nature of whatever this thing is it trying to like. I think there's a lot of podcasts and videos about how to do things, which I think is great. But I think there's the goal is to try to talk about like the, you know, the non-obvious stuff to trying to like make a creative career work in general.
Right.
You know.
Sure.
And it's like, you know, you working in film led to you doing conventions and doing video game art in a way that, again, that's completely unexpected.
Sure.
I never would have guessed.
Yeah. So you mentioned like, oh, getting into art is a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's like what I was, you know, taught to believe my entire life.
Yeah.
So I was avoiding doing artwork my whole life, and I only fell into it accidentally. But I personally think that because I thought of artwork that way, that made artwork safe for me up all the way up until that time as a purely like hobby thing that I could just focus on enjoying, which I think anytime you want to get good at anything, you're going to need a lot of like room to fail. And then when you don't feel bad about that failure all along the way, that's when you can actually get good at it. So yeah, I really thought that I would do anything but artwork up until people started wanting to pay me to do the artwork more than the careers I had spent my 20s trying to force my way into. Yeah. So that's why it's very different than a lot of my peers that I know, at least, where they were trying to make a buck with artwork somehow. Whereas I was just like, I'm just gonna like literally just do it for myself, and then I got discovered as someone who does something different, because I guess I wasn't doing anything like other people are when it comes to like trying to make artwork to be sold.
The act of trying to make a product or something.
Or sell yourself to a studio and be like, I can fit into the machine and be the cog that helps make the production go. Right. I've always just been focused on making something interesting for myself. Yeah. And then actually the things that like end up resonating most with people are the things that I make for very specific people. So namely, like the example that crops up all the time is like my wife. Like I would draw her inside joke type illustrations, and then those are the ones that everybody's like, I'm gonna buy that one.
I love it.
The Psyduck print that I did is like something I did in the very, very, very early stages of me trying out illustration, and that's like the #1 seller because it was really made with no intent that anyone would see it except for my wife. So I feel like there's a lot of like safety and not ever feeling like you're presenting it to someone else.
Well, and I think that playful nature of it and the like non-judgmental nature of it, I think, is the way that like beautiful art is created. Right. And I think the hard part about being like an artist for a living is like trying to combine commerce and art and art making, because
absolutely
a lot of the time when you're trying to make a product, you're ignoring a lot of the emotion that people are they get when they like watch a movie or listen to a song or something. And I think in general it's counterintuitive, but the advice I've gotten from people and in terms of like this podcast that however many episodes I've done is to like follow your passions no matter how bad of an idea it seems like. It's like and if you really, really like anime, or if you like Magic the Gathering or any of that stuff, it's like do it in a way that you care about most, versus trying to make it for other people.
I have to be honest and say I think that's a really idealistic version of the truth. So there's truth to that, absolutely. There's no way you can ever make anything that really resonates with an audience without having the secret ingredients of caring about it, like you're saying. But in truth, if you're someone who purely focuses on that side of things, I think also there's a really huge pitfall of never getting anywhere. Also, so when I talk about this sort of thing with my peers or my wife, we always talk about business brain versus like art brain, and those two things are always like fighting each other. And it's like you can't completely ignore either one, no matter what you do. Just the truth of it is like it's tough. That's why it's a game. And you like some people will only focus on one or the other, and if they do, they'll end up short. And so like what I do personally is I try to switch back and forth. So I will literally be like, the next 2 pieces will be for the business. Obviously still trying to put some of myself in there that makes it work, because it won't work otherwise. And then maybe the next 2 pieces might be for myself. And I feel like it's keeping myself fresh in a way where I don't
burn yourself out.
I don't try to be stuck in the same mentality, both in terms of the content, but also in terms of like the sort of medium that I'm using. I think whatever you're doing is, as long as you're pushing yourself forward and being experimental with it, that's like how you can at least remember the passion of and joy of artwork in the way that it's experimental and a discovery process, so that it's never like you're repeating yourself or getting bored with it.
Absolutely. Well, in general too, I think a couple things. I think in general people have a hard time trusting their own taste, you know, which I think is to me one of the bigger like pitfalls for a lot of people. And then I also think that the ability to trust your taste in terms of hoping other people will like it, I think is another thing that a lot of people have trouble with. You know?
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of convention artists about this, where like the act of, you know, like not even changing their artwork, like changing how they display their prints at their booth makes a big difference in terms of sales. You know, and it's had nothing to do with you, but like I think a lot of the time people might look at themselves and be like, oh, I'm a bad artist because no one's buying my prints. Whereas like the actual problem to solve was the presentation of it. You know? Which I guess that's more business oriented than the like art oriented stuff.
So the thing that comes to mind for me is that Psyduck piece I mentioned. The very first time I posted it, I think I got like 2,000 likes on it, which at the time was like amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think around that time was probably getting like 100 or like maybe at most 500 likes on something. So to get 2,000 was like, oh my god, this is viral. Deal, you know. Right. But then just a year later, I was like, oh, I'm gonna try a Throwback Thursday for the first time. So I'm gonna repost that, and that post has now gotten like 120 something K, and it's like, it wasn't due directly to my growth of my follower account. It was also I posted it differently. Like the way that the image scrolls was simpler and less slides. Right. And so I think in terms of the business side of it, it's like removing some of the choice of the viewer to be like, oh, I got bored and now I'm gonna scroll away, and just be like, oh, I do like this, and then they engage with it. Right. It's making that interaction simpler on that post. You know, it's different than real world like salesmanship, but it follows the same sort of like underlying principles, which is like the difference value, in result is crazy, and that's just business brain side, not artistic.
Absolutely. and I think it's like in order to make this stuff sustainable, trying to make that stuff fun and interesting as well, like not treating it as like the mythical godly algorithm, you know, where it's arbitrary and nonsensical, but having some amount of control and agency over what is shown to people. I've been on both sides of the, I don't know, awful toxic relationship with social media. But in the beginning, it was like super healthy, because it was just like, I'm gonna stop playing video games and other like non-productive hobbies and make artwork and Instagram my positive hobby. Where I would just like, I'm just posting this to like compete against myself, and I didn't have a toxic relationship with it where I was like constantly being sad about how I was comparing to other people. I was just enjoying the like, no one's really looking, so I'm just gonna see how well I can do. And then it gets to that point where you're like, oh no, now I need to like, now everything has to be perfect, and that's where you start to self-destruct. With having that self-doubt corrupt, like you said, your taste or your decisions. And so well, the social media stuff is extremely weird. It's like no other person in history has ever had to grow up being like I think most people to some degree are relatively famous, like in a way that they haven't been before ever, you know. Like to know that like you might have like 1 million followers or something, or 500,000 or whatever. It's like an absurd amount of people are following you, you know. And I think it's like it's easy to look at those people as purely just numbers, or you know, it's easy to just dehumanize people based off social media stuff. And, I think again, it's an unfortunate thing about being a modern artist, is that the social media stuff can be extremely important to a business. And I think it's part of the reason why it's so important to like find other things outside of yourself, other than just your artwork or, you know, your business that give you validation stuff, you know.
No, it's such a double-edged sword, and it's such a weird piece of advice too when you are answering the questions that people always ask about, how do I get to where you are, sort of thing. And it's like, oh yeah, social media was the important thing, but while you're doing your art practice, you can't at all think about social media as being important. And those two things have to live completely separately in order for you to like have a healthy existence.
Absolutely. To create. And I think it's like a strange thing, and for sometimes that desire to try to get more likes or followers or views or something can be so strong that it does seep into the art making and all that kind of stuff. And it's strange. Well, and again, I think it's the people that I know that are generally more successful are the people that are, and I think success is subjective, and I'm not saying that,
Sure.
like there are people that have 0 followers that are like amazing artists, and
Unrelated.
completely unrelated.
Yeah.
But like in terms of like the sustainability or any of that kind of stuff, it's the people that are able to like separate their tasks and I guess like focus on the thing that they're doing at hand,
Right.
fully,
Sure. I think for me it's like, okay, so I think the thing that is most analogous that I've kind of extended to the rest of my life is when I do figure drawing, for example. I have sorry, kind of lose my train of thought. Okay, no, okay.
Go, yeah.
So I got it. So for like 4 years I did figure drawing, and it was every Monday. It was like a free workshop that you could just tip at, and so what I discovered while doing that is that there was that kind of flow state that you get into where you're just grooving and everything's the best thing that you could draw, and it feels good and you're not really working too hard, and within that state I actually feel like I developed the sort of superpower where you like really understand what you're drawing and like can visualize the three-dimensionality of something. And so it's like, oh, I know what that feels like. It's kind of like almost like a separate sensation in my brain. And I was like, because I did it enough, I was like, I know kind of how to tap into that state. And so my chase was just to like be there as much as possible. And even outside of figure drawing, I started to being able to tap into being in that flow state. And so the way that I think about doing my other artwork is I might be corrupted in the like business brain taking over sort of thing of being like, I should draw this because it's going to do well, or people will appreciate it more if I include these elements. And I think it's necessary to have that going on. But at the same time, I'd be like, but I also want to get into that flow state. And that flow state, part of it is like me knowing that I need to be super interested or emotionally connected to the work. And for me, like if it's fan art, it might be like I need to feel like I'm in the story that I'm portraying. I need to like really connect with the story that I'm portraying in the image, and that can be a separate side of myself that I can reach out to and tap into, regardless of whether I'm feeling inspired or like particularly like enthusiastic about being connected with the fan art, or I'm sorry, with like the original source material. It's just like knowing that I can get to that state using those ingredients was like how I feel like I was able to maintain a very like productive workflow, and one that I could depend on, that also was still me while addressing business brain related stuff.
Well, in some ways I think it's weird because like as people, as like creative people, or I think people in general don't really have much control over their own thoughts. Like I think aspirationally and idealistically people want to be, I'm fully inspired all the time. I'm I'm like all in on the art, that's it, and that's what's going to drive me to become super successful. And but like you can't just tell your brain to start thinking this way or stop when you have to, you have to like subtly try to trick yourself into actually doing the work. And you have to like treat yourself well. You have to be kind. I think things like negative affirmations and stuff actually make a big difference.
Huge.
Like if you're like, I'm not very good at this.
Then
that bleeds like 5 hours later, a week later, or whatever, subconsciously into you doing whatever that task
or
was.
just you spiral in the drawing itself, or whatever the thing you're working on, and you like once you've done it enough, you also know when you're spiraling. That's what's annoying. It's like you're like, I'm feeling I'm spiraling, but I'm also so stubborn that I don't want to stop. And instead you waste, a couple hours up to like a whole day just battling, just fighting up here, and therefore there's not enough brain power to make anything happen on the page. And so I feel like when you're saying like a lot of people can't control what they're thinking about or how they're feeling, it's more like for me self-awareness that I'm going off track, and it might need a hard reset of doing something else or doing a completely different idea sometimes can be what like just mixes it up.
Yeah.
Because it's usually a preconceived notion of how good you should be or what the final product should look like exactly that like gets in your way.
Yeah.
Instead of like actually I'm not as good as I imagine. I'm only this good, and I have to be okay with that, with the fact that that is what I'm capable of, and this is just going to be what it is.
Right.
Instead of being like, I can imagine if someone else drew this, it'd be way better, and I'm gonna be
Kim
mad at
Jong-un
myself
did it.
for not being that person.
Yeah.
I know that happens to me all the time still, so it's.
Well, I think that's actually the biggest thing with artists, and it's part of the reason why I'm trying to focus on the why, because I think if you could figure out the why, you know, all that stuff gets a lot easier. You know, it's like if you understand why you're doing something, and you understand yourself really well, and you could start to identify when you're spiraling, or you can identify when you're doing it for the wrong reasons. The act of trying to create, like to, you know, to be like to study spheres or do master studies or all that stuff becomes a lot more like it's easier just because you're able to add context to it in a way that is healthy, you know.
I made a connection just now that makes a lot of sense for me. So when I was in film production, I was an editor for a lot of stuff. Yeah. And so I got very used to the idea of emotionally detaching from what I was working on. Yeah. Because I would work in reality TV, or I would work on a feature film or narrative film in which I didn't care for the script, something like that, right? And so you're like, okay, my job is to make this work the best that the director imagines it to work, but not for my own taste. Right. And so like developing that muscle where you're like, I know how to put in the work and the time and the craft and focus on enjoying just the craft part, that like when I do illustrations for clients that I don't care about the source material at all, it's like I'm used to getting in their shoes and being like, what do they want to see and what would work the best for the result they're going for. Yeah. Right. So I think that's a skill that you have to practice and that a lot of newer artists won't have any experience with because they're used to pleasing themselves or the notion of society or the algorithm, right? But that's like an innumerable number of voices telling them what could go in, versus when I make a piece for a client, or like when I'm directing, when I'm making something for a director, it's one person, and that one person's vision is something that I can address and grab onto. Right. And then when I make something for myself, then I'm like, okay, then now I'm the director. I'm just going to please just myself. Right. So that like singular voice that directs where I should be going is, I think, what adds the clarity and removes some of the doubt that I might otherwise have. Not that I don't have doubts ever, right? It's just like it's a clear North Star to follow. Right. So
well, and in general, again, I think it's the why. It's like the clear North Star and like the thing that pulls you through the fog, you know, in the mist, and the thing that like obscures your vision for what a thing is going to be. Cause, like when you start an image, you could be literally anything. You could draw a photo of literally anything you want. And I think the scary part about all this stuff is like we already know what we want to see. It's just trusting ourselves and almost like giving ourselves permission to do the thing that, you know, like we know we can do, or we know that we want fundamentally. You know?
Yeah, I'll say two things. So first, that's why I use permanent media when I draw. Yeah. Because it's just the fact that I can't second guess the decision halfway through. Like if you did the line for what the arm's gonna go and it was like a big like foreshortening arm, like sometimes you can repurpose a line to do something else, but a lot of times it's just gonna be that if you've already committed. Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, gosh, now I lost it too.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry for distracting you.
It's all right. Yeah. Wait, what were you saying just before?
Like the fog, like an image can be anything, you know, or it's like the trying to trust yourself and give yourself permission to create. You know?
I forget. I had a separate like tangent.
Well, and I think with all this stuff, when I talk to students, I think in general the thing, like the way it starts out is like people are asking about, like how do I do this? Like how do I draw a person? How do I draw a building? How do I draw a car? And part of the conversation about that, but then it mainly shifts to like, okay, like what do you have to do in your life to actually make this thing happen? Like what are you sacrificing? What are you prioritizing? All that kind of stuff to actually try to make this thing you're that you see in your head go down on paper.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And like a lot of the time for being an artist, like, again, like going back to the idea that it's like a bad idea to do art. I don't think it is, like from my perspective, but it's like you could always be studying more, like
you could be taking safer bets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You could be taking safer bets.
Yeah.
And I think the trying to like, I guess have like a healthier perspective on what it means or like I guess a different perspective on what it means to be successful, you know, other than just like the external factors.
Sure.
Because I think if somebody focuses too much, I'm going a little bit stream of consciousness, so
that's fine.
If it doesn't make sense, whatever.
Yeah.
But somebody focuses too much on the external factors of trying to be successful, they're more likely to do things to please other people versus pleasing themselves. So ultimately, they sacrifice a little bit of whatever their vision is.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think the way you get around that problem, whether you're a student or a professional, is like giving yourself time to like putter around, you know, to like, you know, to like, you'll have days now where like, even as like a well-known professional where you will feel like you'll feel like you failed, you know, or you'll have like bad drawing days and stuff.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I feel like that's why I said previously, like the safety net that I had of like not thinking of it as something as my art practice as being something that needed to please other people for a really long time gave me that runway to get good enough at it to be a professional level without like all of the like maybe like 20s angst that you might otherwise feel like not having a job or trying to get a job. I feel like this might be really dark, but all the people that I know who got into animation or games, a lot of them, maybe 90% of them are kind of unhappy being a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
But like if you want the safe route that is something you can more predictably land a job in, like that maybe is also more akin to studying to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, you are going to fit into this mold and you have to work just as hard as those other professions to just get to the purely high enough craft level to make those things work.
Yeah, but I think with that particular thing in general, like I think there are personalities that are geared towards working in a video game studio that are okay just like being texture artist or the rigger or something.
Right.
Which I think it's perfectly okay for people to want to do that stuff.
Yeah.
But I see that sentiment a lot as well, where people are afraid of, you know, getting stuck in their career or, you know, not having anywhere to move. You know.
Right.
But I also think that like that's like being a person. You know, I think in general, security is generally like an illusion. I'm going to sound like kind of tinfoil hatty, but you know, it seems to me like the value of having a technical degree has shot down year over year for the past like 5 decades or something. You know, like having a master's degree is now the new bachelor's, and it costs an absurd amount of money as well, which is an entirely different conversation. But
I think that's definitely where the colloquial like common sense is moving towards. Whereas like most people feel that way, but I mean to plug another podcast, the Daily, they had one about how so much of our society is moving away from higher education that within the next 10-15 years there's going to be a huge gap between the number of qualified American workers and the amount of like high ed related jobs are available. So it's like everyone's like, oh, it's not worth it anymore. It's so student loans are so much, and everybody's got it. So everybody moves away. Enough people are moving away that now there's going to be a big shortcoming in the number of qualified candidates. Yeah. So it's like, it's what we're talking about is such an ephemeral state.
Yeah, right. It's strange.
Yeah, it's true right now. Yeah. Higher ed is super bloated, but it's the point of the conclusion of that podcast was like, but the amount of like job mobility that you have is still significantly higher if you go into higher ed than if you just stop and like, I'll just get a like I don't know, like I'll just become a plumber or some other like more trade job.
Right.
So I know this is like not
this
podcast,
no,
but it's just like I feel I also like have two minds about that particular
Well,
state as well.
I would say it's a very complicated, nuanced conversation because
Sure.
I think in a lot of ways
It might not be this podcast.
No. I think the goal of this is just to like start and then
Sure.
see where it goes.
Okay,
Because
cool,
I think that's actually a thing that a lot of people are interested in. It's like,
yeah.
do I go to art school or not? You know, that's a very common question. Or do I
Sure.
like do a technical degree while I'm while I'm studying art or something? And the answer is like, maybe, it's, I don't know. Like, I dropped out of college and I'm totally happy with that decision.
Sure.
But that's based on my own career path, which is a
Right.
little bit like, I'm just going to do like whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need a degree.
The creative fields often don't need a college degree.
Yeah.
What they need is a resume or portfolio that really speaks to the person hiring.
Right.
And I mean, that's why I didn't go to art school, and what I studied, I feel like it was more just a practice in hustling.
Yeah.
Which you could do while having a regular job, maybe.
Yeah.
If you happen to land within a field that you're willing to do that hustle. If you only get a job at a place that you don't really care about, then maybe you'll never learn to like really push yourself.
Yeah.
Which is the skill you need if you want to get into one of these more fun creative jobs.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where a lot of the most famous people that you meet in terms of the art field didn't have a traditional like path getting there.
Yeah.
Because the reason they got their job is because their work looks different than everybody who took the more trodden path. Right. So it's like when people ask me how to be me, I can tell them what I did, but it's so much circumstance and luck with meeting people who needed or wanted what I had to offer.
Yeah.
That like, I don't know if that's a repeatable thing.
I would say it's probably not.
Yeah.
I think once a path has been walked, especially in entertainment, it's kind of closed off to other people. But I also think the obscurity of it and the bizarre nature of it is also like a good sign for people. Like,
Sure.
I think in general, like if you didn't trust yourself from the very beginning, you wouldn't have had the opportunities put in front of you.
Sure.
And that faith in yourself was ultimately the thing that let you take advantage of those positive opportunities.
Right. Yeah. I've heard it put this way, where it's like, it's kind of like the number of people who are willing to put in the time to get good at whatever it is that you're interested in doing just dwindles over time.
Yeah.
And so it's like, maybe that's why it doesn't work until you're in your early or mid 30s, that a lot of us at least like fall into a job that happens to work for their life.
Right.
Because everybody else has given up and moved on to a safer or like just different path for them. And for me, I fell into this one not even going for art, and it's more like the other things didn't work.
Right. Well, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and like for Stan, he wanted to be a Disney animator, and from one perspective, he's a failed Disney animator, and from another, he's like a very famous art YouTuber. You know? And it's like, and it's completely just based off the perspective that you take, And some people actually might look at him as a failure for being a YouTuber and not working on the like latest Pixar movies. And I think in some sense both perspectives are valid depending on who you talk to. You know? And I think that's part of the idea of trying to reframe whatever your success is, because it's very easy to look at anything that you do as like, you could break down everything as like, oh, I was a failure because I didn't do this on time or in this exact way. I wasn't the best. So
I feel like school, as valuable as it is, and I'm not trying to say like don't go to school because it's not worth your time. But
I dropped out of college because Bryce said so.
But so much of education is trying to mold everybody into this ideal, which oftentimes does not line up with what society actually wants when they're hiring somebody. And that happens from the earliest like grade school ages, and that's why like kids are tracked and led to believe that they're bad at something, and that certain skills that they're interested in have no value, when in reality like none of that is true. And that's super frustrating. But I get now as an adult that the value of school was just teaching someone how to grit and deal with things that are hard. Because life is about being able to deal with hard things, not so much that you need to remember your 6th grade history lessons.
Algebra or something.
Not that you need to do that, but you need to be someone who can learn how to do that.
And fundamentally like somebody who could solve problems. And it's, I think like in general the people that I talk to that are like successful in the way that, you know, like I guess the average definition of success are the people that are able to just like focus on problem solving. You know,
that's true.
Like they like, you know, if you tried something else, you probably would have been successful at something else. You know, like eventually, right? And it's just like the grit and the ability to focus on solving those problems.
Right.
You know?
I agree. I feel like where I learned that from actually is from Lai, from my wife. So she was a middle school and high school teacher for like 6 years.
Yeah.
And during that time, I was working on my first video game, Aegis Defenders. And during that time, I was like seeing her work as hard as I've ever seen anyone work in my entire life.
Yeah.
Like, my dad's really hard worker, really strong work ethic, but like she would wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning and be working sometimes until 8 at night. Yeah. And go to bed at like 9 or 10 o'clock because she doesn't have any time, right? She just needed to sleep because she's not even gonna get 8 hours. So I was like, I can't let her be working harder at being a teacher than me like chasing my dream project of making this video game. So I'm gonna like work some more hours and work as hard as she did. That is not a like healthy boundary between your life and work, but it's like in your 20s, like I was telling you previously, like sometimes there's a time in your life where you do need to hustle and work really hard and see what you're capable of and push yourself to the absolute limit to know like what you can do. You know, and once you figure out like, okay, of all the things I've tried really hard at, like this is the one where it comes easily and it still goes well, which is what the work-life balance like journey is, where of like I can put in a lot less effort and enjoy life, but still put out something really good.
Absolutely.
Like that's finding that strength in yourself only happens when you do push yourself to that limit.
Well, I think part of that as well is like self-chosen hard things. Yeah. Because I think if you're only assigned difficult things by other people, you're not going to be interested in it. You know, it's like
or it'd be super lucky if you were, but
well, it does happen sometimes. Like some people are just like, yes, I love algebra, I love calculus, I love this stuff, and you know that's great for them, but it doesn't happen for most people. Right. But I think it's like the ability to choose to do hard things is part of the thing that actually helps you through, you know, like anything, you know. And if you're able to choose it yourself, that makes it way easier to continue to do it.
Right. Or you beat yourself more.
Just trying to convince yourself you like drawing. I love drawing, right? It's like, but I think part of it is it never gets easy. You know? It gets harder in a lot of ways. Like, you know, you're no longer just drawing. You're dealing with taxes too. You know, like running a business and having employees and stuff, and that's hard. That's like a lot of other problem solving on top of just doing the art, you know. And
I think one of the things that you constantly second guess yourself throughout your life is like whether you've wasted time doing something previously. But then when you find yourself magically fall into a situation where everything's working well, it's usually because of all those other things that you had to do, that you're like, I don't know why it's important to be a producer right now, but like actually all those skills are coming in handy once you're a full-time artist, because you actually have to have skills of a producer. You know, so at least when people are like, I'm taking a break from doing artwork and I'm just gonna do something else for a while just because they have to do whatever they have to do to make finances make sense, like I don't ever want them to feel like that's wasted time too, because all of those, like being a great artist includes being a well-rounded human being. You know, as a communicator and as a person who can survive in this society. So
well, I think no matter what, you're gonna, like, everyone messes up that balance because like, you know, just by the nature of doing one thing, you're not doing another. Like if you're drawing, you're not spending time with your family, and if you're spending time with your family, then you're not drawing and you're not making money, and it's like you have to, at a certain point, like that's just like the bare minimum as well. At some point, like health stuff might come up, or travel, or vacation, or like trying to expand your like you were doing video game stuff this year. And it's like that is hard. You know, there's like a whole other host of problems that you have to solve on that. So there's probably a sacrifice there as well.
I don't know if there's something to the thread I was on earlier of saying like I fell into this because it actually was the easiest thing. Right. And like the work balance thing is like, what is the easiest thing? You find the path of least resistance for getting result that like hits the most targets simultaneously. And like that is where you can find balance, because you just literally have enough efficiency in your time being spent that you're like, oh, I enjoy doing it, I make money doing it, and I can be building these other, you know, potential seeds of careers while doing it, like, and having the peace of mind that happens, versus like, I think when you're really young and you don't know what you're truly good at or what's worth investing your time in, you're like, maybe the path that's the hardest is the one that's gonna get the most benefits.
Right.
And you're just like, because it's hard, I'm gonna do that one.
Right.
And you'll get a lot out of that, sure, like as we're saying, in terms of learning to deal with hard life stuff. But
it doesn't all have to be hard.
Yeah, but in truth, like what happened to me is like, life is hard, and so the thing I'm good at is the easiest way to deal with it.
Well, and in general, it's like the universe is telling you to do that thing specifically,
right?
You know, and like there are people that might try to do what you were doing, and then they fall into something else completely,
right,
you know, which does happen all the time,
of course, you know?
Yeah. And I think in some way, like I talk about this all the time on my podcast. Like I don't know if I believe in free will, like where you don't like really choose what you care about.
Sure.
Like you weren't. Like you didn't choose where you were born or who your parents are, your gender, how much money you like had when you were growing up, like who your friends were, where you went to high school. All that stuff is out of your control.
Yeah.
And arguably, I think most of that stuff makes up your personality.
Sure.
You know? And it's like you liking anime and all that stuff was like probably influenced by your culture.
By the way, I'm on the very same page.
Yeah.
Since I was in the high school age where you can start thinking about these things.
About that stuff.
Yeah, I've had the same kind of feeling of it, almost being like, what are those, like Ruth Goldberg machines? Something like that.
Yeah,
sorry, I get the name wrong, but where there's enough elements put in place that I only can affect one thing, and that's, you know, it's and then when I record that and play it back again, it's going to be the same result every time.
Right.
So like so much of who I am is dictated by things I didn't get to choose.
Right.
But I think I don't know if this is now going into a different tangent.
Well,
but I think the part that feels like you have enough control over is how much of your own effort you're willing to put in. Because it always feels like you could give up.
Right. All the time. Yeah. Like
it always feels like, I don't know if I want to work any harder than I'm working right now, or push myself harder. And I think that is the thing that I actually am dedicated to always trying to do, because I personally feel like that's where I'm able to make the progress that makes my life better.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just more afraid of, like, whenever I don't take chances or whenever I don't try to like push myself in terms of the art practice, that's when I will find my artwork boring, and so will other people. Because I think from observation, I see other artists who like find a thing that works for them and then just rinse and repeat it until I'm bored of it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that for other people.
Right.
So as much as I know I need to like fulfill a bottom line and produce work, and some of the work has to be more repetitious in terms of like what I'm doing with it, like some portion of the practice needs to be exciting, different, and new and challenging to just make me feel like I'm striving to be better.
Yeah. To keep it interesting for you and your like audience as well.
That too. Yeah. Otherwise, it is actually boring. But
yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, an analogy I use is like, you know, when like a 5-year-old drops their ice cream in the sandbox, that's literally the worst thing that's ever happened to them. You know, it's like, and their reaction is totally proportional to them.
Yeah.
To like how they're crying and screaming and stuff, and you know, like as we get older, we have disappointments and stuff, and like. The version that you are now, like I really don't think we know ourselves, and I think the act of being a person is figuring out whatever that is. And when you find success, you're like getting closer to whatever that like who you are actually, you know, and what you're like, what you can do, what your like limits are, like where you think you can go, and all that kind of stuff. And I think in general, when we question those preconceived ideas of who we are, we're generally met with like, oh, we can do more than what we think we can.
Sure.
You know, our expectations and limits to what we can do. It's like, you know, like you never would have guessed you would be in the spot that you are now, you know. And it's been like a crazy adventure and journey, I'm sure, to be able to get to where you are, you know, with like ups and downs and all that kind of stuff. But,
sure.
but you might look back on it in the same way that like we look back on like a 5-year-old who dropped their ice cream and be like, those things weren't as,
oh man,
you know,
but it hurts.
It hurts. It's really bad. You know?
Those moments I'm telling you in your 20s where you push it to the limit. You will have those times where you ugly cry because you it didn't work out and that ice cream isn't coming back.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's like I think you know, I get in trouble for this. I talk about God sometimes.
Oh,
just the idea of God, and it's like
it's a really popular subject.
It's very popular. Everyone loves it. Yeah. But it's I think that's the idea. It's like we don't know who we are, and we're just trying to figure out whatever that is. And like it's like a conversation with God in some sense. You know.
I see.
Like just
that doesn't seem very controversial.
Well, I mean, you know, it goes.
You can go further.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to start. Yeah, everyone should be a Catholic. You know. But you know, I think it's like a strange thing because, like when it comes to this podcast, like it's like rough around the edges and stuff, and I'm trying to do it in a way that I'm actually willing to do it.
Sure.
You know? Because like I think if I wanted it to be like of course I want it to be like a giant podcast with a massive production value and all that kind of stuff, but realistically, like where I'm at, I actually just can't do that. Like I can't afford a studio space. I can afford like these cameras, this fan, and this microphone. You know.
Yeah.
And if I was waiting to like for the person I want it to be versus like treating it as like an exploration, I think I would never actually grow as a result of it.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
I think with your art, even like I think art is indicative of this mostly. Like your art is like way more of like a diary or an exploration of who you are, rather than just like a series of amazing illustrations.
Right.
You know,
Right.
stuff.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm kind of rambling.
No. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that for sure. I'm not sure what I have to add exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess the part that makes sense to me is like when I was trying to do film related stuff, I wanted to be a director.
Yeah.
And what I realized for me was like, oh, I love directing and I like working with actors. I love the whole thing. But in order to get good at it, I see that I would need a lot of practice.
Yeah.
But to have a lot of practice, I would have to have a lot more like essentially money, but ways to get money. And I didn't see it within myself to find those paths. You know, because a lot of it was like, oh, either you are cool with constantly getting connections and working your way through that, or you actually have a lot of money, or some other like, you know, combination thereof.
Yeah.
And so what I found for myself was like, oh, if I'm working in video games, or art also works, like I can practice with like almost no budget.
Yeah.
Right. And so like what you're doing as far as like this YouTube process YouTube / podcast, is you found a cost-effective way to approach the things that you're interested in.
Yeah.
I'm either by just talking about it or by making content that you actually authentically want to make and consume, and that ability to do it all the time with what you have available is the practice you need to get good at it to the point where someone actually wants to watch it or consume it. And that is where like once you've done it long enough, whether you actually stick with this medium or not, you have honed your skills as a storyteller or as
a speaker and
whatever.
Right.
So many skills involved in making this kind of content, that it might be just the practice you needed to get that job you're finally happy and financially whole with. You know, like that's the whole cycle.
Right.
That I think all the artists that you talk to who have that like stability in their life or attain that level of success have had to have that same amount of practice and safety.
Right. Well, we were talking about it before the podcast even started. Like you know, you've been doing conventions for like 3 years.
Yeah.
You know, and it's been like a journey. You've been trying it out and stuff, and it's like a life-changing thing. And you know, it's like you said, like first year is really scary and hard and lots of failure, and then second year you have a little bit more in control, and third year you're like, okay, I kind of get it now. You know. But it doesn't start like it starts out with that.
The runway before that is why it worked. Right. So like we were lucky enough to have our convention circuit kind of almost immediately be a success. But it's because there was like probably 10 years worth of me drawing for myself, and that stuff wouldn't have sold to anybody.
Right.
Actually, before I started doing conventions seriously after pandemic. I had done just 2 shows before that, but like sharing half a table with someone at a convention where there's like 500 people there.
Yeah, right.
And so
Yeah.
like we lost money every time that we did, well, the 2 times that we did it. And so I was like, oh, this is not a path for me then. You know, this is not a way that you can survive or make money. And yeah, I feel like it's just the time that it took before I was ready.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, the puttering around and experimenting and stuff. And
right.
when I talk to students, one of the common things is, like, how do I do what you did, or any of that kind of stuff. And in general, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to actually figure it out.
Right.
You're constantly growing and stuff. And
yeah, I wonder if you talk to anybody who has the opposite thing happen, where like I think you see a lot of young artists who like they're like 20, and then they get a job at like Netflix or Sony or wherever it is, and it's because they happen to be blessed with an extremely high level of skill and maybe talent for what they're doing. But I think there's, for as much as I'm lacking compared to like those sorts of artists, like I think there's a thing with life experience and all the things that we mentioned previously of like, oh, just traveling or just dealing with hardship, like that, like they don't have yet, and like that shortcoming will.
It's scary. I mean,
it will be a different, journey to get there.
Well, I think becoming a fully realized person, it's like success is just it's not even part of it. I think, and I think often like the thing that we're trying to experience now is like it's pretty rare actually, and somebody who experiences a huge amount of financial success or like followers or whatever when they're young, there's a trade-off there where it's like you go directly from high school to like working on stuff that's seen by millions of people and being paid a whole boatload of money, and having all this pressure, you're giving up like maybe some of your time you could have just been like a kid skateboarding around your park or something, or playing video games or hanging out with friends and all that kind of stuff, like going bowling. And I think that stuff is actually really important for someone's development, just like puttering around and just being like low pressure, like in the same way you were drawing for fun with no audience and just doing it because you liked it. I think missing out on that is actually potentially very dangerous. If you go in and it's like, oh, the world and everyone else likes this identity of me, so I guess I'm going to do that. I think it removes a lot of the agency from the person. Like, oh, of course I'm going to do the thing that everyone is telling me to do, that I'm getting a lot of like love for. Right. And I think it's like a version of like the child actor syndrome thing, where it's like it's awesome at first, but then there's a darker side to it a little bit. Yeah.
To take your podcast into another like super tangential direction, Lai and we often like to poke fun at how capitalism is the cause and root of all problems within our society.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
And I think it's one of those things where it's like, once you replace something with something that's born out of capitalism as like, oh, prioritize some sort of financial strategy or success over the traditional path that a family or person might have, like you lose something that you don't know how valuable it is until you like in the rearview mirror see that like a whole group of other people have it or something like that. You just, it's just so intangible. That's why like any system that's driven by capitalism will just completely ignore it and disregard it. But it's like, oh, actually, that might be the whole point of life.
Yeah.
Like
to enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh, being closer with our families or the people that we care about, rather than being like, hey, each of us independently spread apart, and now we're all making a lot more money, but we have no family or communication or community or things like that. It's like, wait, why did I want the money? It was so I could be with the family and have the community be tighter or stronger, right?
Absolutely.
So it's what you're saying, where it's like, oh, the child actor syndrome, that makes perfect sense. But it's
super complicated.
It's part of it. It's like we can't point at a particular problem. We have to look at how the entire society has shifted all of our values to not prioritize the things that really are important to us as human beings, as opposed to members of this particular society.
Right. Well, and it's strange because I think that like when you hear about interviews with people on their deathbed or something, they're always like, I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I didn't work
And
as
it's
much.
and it's obvious to
and,
us.
and it's
yeah.
obvious at the end,
Yeah,
right? It's like,
yeah.
oh, I should have just spent time with my kids. I should have just spent time with my husband or
Yeah.
girlfriend or wife or something. It's like that's always the obvious
Mm.
thing. But I think, like, the weird part about that is like we don't listen to good advice as humans. Like we have to walk down that path. We have to work too much, or we have to ignore something in order to start to value it more. It's like a
But that is because we live in this society. But we cannot choose to not.
yeah,
be part of this
exactly.
society.
You have no choice, right? You have to eat. You have
Yeah,
to you have to do
right.
things. Like you don't like I want a lot of followers. I want to be famous, and it's like I wish I didn't want that, but that's part of like
You want
how I was
that because
raised.
that leads to your safety and well-being.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Right.
And why wouldn't you want those things? You have no choice
Yeah.
but to prioritize those things.
Right.
And so like you shouldn't feel shame for wanting these things when you have no choice but to. But at the same time, like somehow taking a step back from that big picture and looking at like actually, but what do I need as a human being?
Yeah.
And how do you feed those things? It's just crazy because they're so at odds with
Right.
the other motivations you have.
Well,
in your life.
I mean, it's the worst part about being a person is that like the same. I think like I might be totally wrong like scientifically, but I think the same parts of your brain that tell you like a cheetah or a snake is going to eat you is the same part of your brain that tells you that like, oh, your social media following isn't good enough. I think it's the same thing. It's like
Right.
your
You're being cut
livelihood
off
is
from
at-
the tribe.
Yeah,
somehow.
exactly. Yeah, your livelihood is at stake or something.
Yeah.
It's the same. Like your brain panics about it, and it's like arbitrary and nonsensical. But
Yeah.
and you start to panic, and it's like a totally understandable emotion. You know.
Right. It's death.
Yeah.
Like when getting cut out from the tribe was death.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't live by yourself. Like not being popular is similar in the way that it affects you emotionally, and feels maybe equally dangerous.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it's like logically you could be like, oh, of course I'm going to be okay. But
Yeah.
your brain, like because we value this stuff.
What,
it's hard
what
to
you
escape
internally need is a sense of safe community.
it.
And social media is anything but.
Yeah, dude. I'm starting to get haters. Like I'm at that stage where I'm like having people be like, "You fucking idiot." And it's like,
Really?
a little bit. I understand it. It's just
Okay.
like
We don't need to get into it unless we want to.
no. Well, I'm sure you've had your own fair share of haters as well. It's like part of just being a person online, I think. But I think it's like just by the nature of asking for this stuff, you're asking for attention. So inevitably, people will give you negative attention. But I like I'm fine. I'm fine with it. But
Sure.
and obviously I wish it wasn't the case. But
Yeah.
it's just it's part of the sacrifice to trying to do this stuff.
Got it. Yeah.
But,
Yeah. It's a difficult thing as a human being to like put yourself out there.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's because it's vulnerable and it's dangerous, and that's why, as much as social media is about spreading to as many people as possible, like internally, like we're saying as human beings, we actually need to like narrow that scope of who we decide we will allow to have an opinion that matters to us.
Yeah.
Right. Like the circle of friends who you know actually care about you.
Trying to have your tribe.
Yeah,
right?
are the ones that you should be like, they're actually the only ones that I care whether they like what I do or not.
Yeah.
But I will share it so strangers, absolute strangers, can consume it
and
as a
chime in
thing that they
sometimes,
can make money. I can like make a livelihood out of it. But yeah, like my core family or community of friends, like in some ways you like with art in general, like you can only be pleasing really a very specific audience,
Right.
And anytime you go beyond that, it's dangerous.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, a question I ask everybody on the podcast, it's like, would you be doing the same exact thing you're doing right now if you had $1 billion?
Right.
And the purpose of that is like, if you have $1 billion, you're most likely the most successful and I guess standout member of your immediate community. Like you theoretically don't have to worry about external validation because everything you could possibly do is covered. You could do any project, you could do anything you want. You're like, I have $1 billion. I've theoretically provided a lot of value to people.
Sure.
And it's like I don't think I could pay you money to stop drawing. I don't think I could pay you money to stop hanging out with your family. Like there are things in your life that are inherently priceless.
Sure.
And I think we don't have $1 billion. We don't have that sort of freedom, but we have like some control over what would like you know what we would be doing if we had $1 billion. Like I would still want to do this podcast. I would still want to talk to people about creativity and what it means to be a person and stuff. And I'd still want to draw. I'd still want to do like hang out with friends and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And thinking about it from that perspective, it's literally priceless. Like you can't pay me to not do that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think again, like trying to be more in line with whatever that is for yourself. You know. And I guess also to a degree being aware of like how simple what you want really is. Like you know, you really you don't need $1 billion to do the things you want. You need like all in maybe like $5 million to ball out, you know, and anything else beyond that is like an absurd amount of excess, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually volunteered that answer to my wife maybe a few months ago. I was like, if I had won the lottery, I'd be doing the same thing tomorrow.
I was talking to Chris about it. Like he would still do conventions too.
Sure.
And it's like,
well, conventions is just like this bottomless, like, or not bottomless, just what's the word? Just infinite number of positive feedback. Like just because you're just constantly meeting people who've never seen your stuff before, and then so you get those fresh eyes that are invigorating. You know, and so that's part of the reason why I would always do conventions for as long as as long as I have the energy.
Right.
You know,
as long as
they're also very tiring is what I'll say. But I think having that sense of like that you are serving other people, you know, that your work means something to other people, I think is a big motivating factor for anybody. You know, just like that you can connect with real people and that you make an impact. Like that's
huge.
That's what feels good. You know,
Right.
Actually, talking about filmmaking again, I met someone who does it professionally now for their like, you know, whole life. But they helped out a convention for the first time maybe a couple months ago, and they're like, wait, this is like actually the feeling that like filmmakers seek after for like their whole lives.
Right.
But they get it once every like few years after they finish filming something for like a day. You know? And then they wait for the next, you know, film production to be over to get that one like hit of satisfaction. But at a convention, you get it constantly.
So
I mean, if you make something that really resonates, then it feels like the best thing. So.
Well, and I think being honest with yourself and being like, I think there's a sentiment sometimes online to feel like social media is all bad and to want external validation is all bad, but it's totally natural to be pumped up, to be excited by other people giving you positive emotion. I think the negative is when all of your self-worth comes from external factors like that. You know?
Right. No, there's definitely no shame in like feeding your internal sense of needing a community and needing validation from another group of people. Like you do need that, and social media is now a thing where you're seeing a lot of people seek that out. But just like as a kid, when you like, you know, put yourself out there in a way that you're trying to figure out yourself, and kids make fun of you for being a different person, like that's those are the same bullies that will like
absolutely
troll you on social media, right?
Well, and it feels just as bad when you're 5 years old.
And
it's like, you know, but when looking back, it's equally as silly. You know, it's like, oh, you know,
it's like as human beings, we need all of these things, and I guess it's just like once you get old enough, you realize where to get it from. That that is a healthy way to keep yourself, you know, mentally stable and sustained. And then that normally means not trying to be famous for everybody. But as a young person, like you are just looking for anybody to connect with, and that's normal and makes sense that social media then seems like a very efficient way to find those people. It's just that the truth is that you can't care about all those people who you will find on there. And the real human connection of actually getting to know the people that you decide are worth respecting their opinion. That's like a lifelong thing.
And it's strange. I and you find it, and sometimes it goes away, and it's like finding your community is something that I think is something that everybody has to do. And whether it be like at a job or at church or at like, you know, as a volunteer thing or conventions or whatever. Like, and I know for conventions, like there is a circuit of people that kind of travel the world together, like accidentally, pretty much.
Yeah, your coworkers like are people you see all around the world.
It's really bizarre. It's like the weirdest job on the planet. Like, oh, I'm in Abu Dhabi and there's that guy. Or I mean, like, you know.
Well, hopefully you have a good relationship with the ones you see all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. We've been recording for about an hour or so. Do you want to finish up there? Or,
did you get everything you needed?
I think so. The purpose of this is just talk about, you know, just have a conversation. Yeah,
just
stuff.
Yeah. How long do you usually cut the episodes to?
I try to do an hour to 2 hours. Sometimes they go to like 3 or 4, but
the actual episode's an hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's I try to keep in as much as I can.
Okay.
Where it's like and I'll send you a version for you to take a look at before I publish and everything.
Okay. So. Cool. Well, unless you had any other questions, that's cool.
How do you become a good artist? What pen do you use? I think we're good. I mean, do you want to tell people how to follow you? Or
sure. Should I just say it in the camera?
Yeah.
Okay. You can follow me at BryceCoDraws on Instagram.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sweet. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks. Well, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, homie. Appreciate it.
Sketchy Van.